Hi, welcome to Hope and Healing. My name is Jeff Friedman, and Hope and Healing is a show that will be brought to you each week by Creative Tucson, where we're going to talk about mental health issues, behavioral health issues, what these look like, how they're treated, how a person successfully recovers from different mental health, behavioral health problems. And so each week we're going to have a guest on who will talk about a specific area of mental health, emotional health, and the treatment of that. And today we have as our guest Maggie Morton.
Hi.
And Maggie Morton is a friend of mine. She's also a licensed clinical social worker in the state of Arizona and has been working as a therapist for 27 years.
Yeah.
It's hard to imagine that.
It really is.
In that time, she's worked with couples, individuals, families, other groups. Her current specialty focuses on intimacy and trauma. And Maggie's worked with a variety of in-home family therapy environments, also inpatient treatment, and most importantly, Maggie has a private practice here in Tucson. Besides being a therapist, I hear you're an avid skier,
Yeah.
a licensed fitness instructor. I didn't know that either.
Yeah.
And the thing that surprised me most of all was you're an amateur welder. You build steel fences when you get an opportunity.
I do, yeah. That was something I sort of stumbled into by meeting a friend who had built a beautiful fence, and I just asked him about it, and he said, "Oh, I can teach you how to do that." So in my typical fashion, I bought a bunch of steel and bought a welder and had him teach me how to use it.
So in your typical fashion, I guess what that would say to me is that you are not a person who is shy or retiring and has a fair amount of confidence in what she can do if she puts her mind to it.
Well, one of those is true, one of them not so much. I do have a lot of confidence in testing myself, and I really like the process of challenging myself to learn new stuff, but I actually am pretty shy.
Oh, yeah?
And it's kind of funny in therapy. Of course, I'm meeting with people, engaging with people all day
Right.
long. In fitness classes, I'm the instructor, I'm bringing the awesome blah, blah,
Sure.
blah. But I'm actually a fairly shy person, so it's nice. It pulls me out, pulls me forward.
You know, sometimes it's helpful to have just a little bit of structure
Sure.
in approaching a relationship.
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
it can be richer for it. So I'd like to ask you a little bit about your work with
Sure.
couples.
Sure.
And unfortunately, this is an area of specialty I really don't know anything about.
Okay.
So if I ask a question that doesn't make sense to you, please let
Sure.
me know. So is there such a thing as a basic premise for couples work?
I think there are several. Certainly the one in which I'm trained is a non-pathological systemic model. So without getting all jargony, I don't want to talk to people starting out with the idea of what's going wrong or what's dysfunctional, because I'll miss stuff that I really need and it'll be really disrespectful.
Right.
So instead, with anybody with whom I'm working, I want to start with the question, how did you learn that?
Yeah.
You know, where did that come from? What informed the way that you navigate the world?
Right.
That's a fascinating question with individuals. It's particularly helpful with regard to trauma. And when you get two individuals together and all of the stuff that has informed their choices and the way they navigate, it's like a Rubik's Cube. It's so hard to keep all of that lined up, but it's such fascinating work, so challenging. I love it.
So by the time people come to see you,
Yeah.
it's almost impossible not to find some kind of adaptivity that
yeah.
they've come up with on their own.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Probably by the time you've gotten into middle school or grade school,
Right.
you're going to have found some adaptivity. Yeah.
You know, I am involved in a project that's out of London, and I told Maggie a little bit about this.
Sure.
And One of the people I was working with last summer in this is so wealthy that he's on what's called the Forbes list. Do you know what that is? It's
I
the
do.
list of the richest people in the
Sure.
world, and it's a fairly short list. Anyway, when we first started talking, one of the things that he said to me is that he was terribly ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, when he was a kid.
Yeah.
And I said, how it was a person who had that, and he gave me some examples of how bad it was, and it was bad.
Yeah.
And so I asked him, I guess the obvious question, might be the stupid question, but I asked him the question, how does a person become so rich?
Sure.
And he made every dollar himself, dealing with ADHD. How do you become so successful? And he said, by the time I was 18 years old, I figured out a way around it.
Yeah.
Now, psychiatrists can't do that, and therapists and psychologists, but this 18-year-old kid
Yeah.
found it.
Right. And
So,
so we
yeah.
always adapt. We're
Right.
always learning, and we don't learn the wrong thing. So I think that's the trouble with a pathology-based model, is to tell somebody you learned wrong.
Right.
Well, given their circumstances, I doubt it. You know, kids learn what they need. And even if you've grown up learning some very guarded or very antagonistic things, whatever, that was probably useful at the time.
Yes.
I want to start by honoring what you learned, and then flip around and think, uh-oh, is it troubling? Is
Right,
it getting
right.
in your way? Is it limiting you now?
Today.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
yeah.
So you find a man who grew up on the streets of the worst neighborhood in the United
Yeah.
States, and the way he survived was he became kind of pugnacious with other people.
Right.
And then he marries a woman whose father was an abusive rager.
Yeah.
And it's just just an unfortunate match
Actually,
of these.
it's not unfortunate. They've found what they know.
Ah,
They've found where their skill set is. There's a way to
Right.
say we choose exactly right for what we know at the time. I mean, there's
okay.
alchemy to that that's just elegant.
Oh,
So
okay.
we're gonna, and this is one of the ways that I think about it, we're gonna choose a partner in whose presence we still have to go back and learn what was not on the menu for us before. So for example, if I'm that woman and I've grown up with violence or fear, I'm going to have learned a whole bunch of things, how to figure out what's happening and, you know, which way is the wind blowing, how to navigate that, but I might not have learned how to say, you know, you don't get to talk to me that way, because that would have been a dangerous thing to learn then.
exactly, the last thing.
But I need it today.
Right.
So I'm going to pick a partner in whose presence I still have to learn that in order to have a really emotionally intimate connection.
Are people receptive to the idea that they have to remake a lot of their
I
ways
think-
of living?
You know, I was thinking about this the other day. As long as you're accurate, I, the therapist, am accurate in assessing what's missing for folks, what skill set is missing, as long as I'm really spot on, you can say anything to somebody. You can say very blunt things. You can say anything as long as your intention is 100% kind
Yes.
and 100% willing to be helpful. So I love that. I can be very blunt and confrontive in sessions when I know that people can handle that.
Right.
It makes it faster. And yeah, I think sometimes people are receptive to saying, I'm looking at this in a deeper way. I've always felt so stuck. I've always felt trapped. It doesn't mean necessarily that they're going to be able to make those changes. And that's something that's difficult for me in couples work. I cannot have an agenda. I can't know what they're going to learn and what they're going to ask of themselves and what part of themselves they'll develop. So I have to just, you know, do the work and
Right.
see what they come forward with.
And keep your ego out of the room.
Absolutely right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, that sometimes therapists, I think, get too attached to it being successful.
Right.
And
Right.
I just did a show last week with a fellow who works in a treatment center where they mostly do drug and alcohol.
Sure.
And I think sometimes the therapists in those kind of places can want sobriety more than the client
Oh, yeah.
does. And when that happens and the therapist doesn't recognize it,
Right.
it gets screwball.
Yeah, it really does.
Yeah.
That's all kinds of therapy, right? If
Yeah.
I want someone to grow or if I
Right.
want a marriage to succeed,
Yeah,
it doesn't matter what I want. I don't get a vote. It's really these two people making decisions about how much they're going to grow themselves up, how they stand up to themselves, for themselves, with themselves.
right, right.
Yeah, I don't know what they're going to do.
So you come to the work without presuming any pathology on the part of either person.
Right.
And so where's the point of engagement?
They start.
They start.
They come in and say some version of I want.
Okay.
And actually, that's one of the trickiest things about couples work the way I've learned to do it. People don't expect this. They come in and couples will say very, kindly or subtly, please change my partner because they're driving me
Right.
mad, right? Or please take my side and tell the other person they're wrong. I can't do that. I'm not going to be useful to anybody if I do that. So, the board of behavioral health tells me I have to do a treatment plan. Great. I'm going to do a treatment plan with each individual saying some version of the question. Sometimes I'll ask it this bluntly. Whether your partner changes a single thing, what are you here to work on? That individual focus is so freeing and so frightening and so powerful for people because they come in saying, essentially, I want my partner to be different so that I can feel better. And that's a trap. I don't know if your partner is going to be different.
Yeah.
But when they start to identify, I want me to be different. I want me to be stronger or more powerful. I want to heal something in me.
Yeah.
I want to trust something in me. Then one person in that dyad changes, and it changes the whole system. It's really powerful. And as I said, really frightening. People's eyes get big when they say, well, what do you mean if my partner doesn't change anything? Because then the inevitable question comes in, what if I change and the other person doesn't?
Right.
And yeah, what if?
That's a scary question.
Terrifying, yeah, sure.
So you said something interesting a minute ago that a very common thing is that a person will come in as part of a couple and then in some way communicate to you,
Sure.
I'm doing fine, it's this person that needs to change.
Right.
Are there subtle ways that a person will try to form an alliance between you and them, but not you and us?
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, on the phone call sometimes.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. Sometimes people, will send me an email, that's 4 pages long. Here's what's happening. And of course, I'm taking information from that, right? Oh, this is how this person is positioning themselves. This
Right.
person wants to, sort of align. And I'm not going to judge it. I'm just going to notice it.
Yeah.
Sure. It's tricky.
I sometimes on TV I'll watch these cop reality shows where they just follow a squad car.
Yeah.
And they'll be called to some kind of a disturbance.
Sure.
And somebody will rush out and talk to them and tell them a story
Sure.
that is so one-sided. And you think, there is no story in the world that's this one-sided. There is no
Right.
person who's so clean as you are making yourself out to be. And somebody so unreasonable as you're describing this other person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when they're both in the room, that's one of the reasons I love couples work. If you're just working with the individual, you're going to get that story. And it's, this is what I'm doing and I'm doing, but my partner isn't. When they're both there together, and I hear this person say, yes, but I didn't, and then the partner goes, yeah, and you did that too. Okay, well, let's back up. And so if we're talking about, I love the idea of co-creation. I think it's absolutely accurate. We co-create. I mean, Lego by Lego.
Right.
We co-create
Yes.
our relationships.
Yes.
So if we even have that dynamic of a saint and sinner, two people created that on purpose. If we have the dynamic of one person is,
On purpose, but not consciously.
well, we love to say it's not conscious.
Uh-huh.
It's a little bit of a gray area.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So when we've created this together, I think sometimes people find that bruising or daunting to think, gosh, I'm so unhappy in my marriage, or my relationship is so painful to me. The useful thing about knowing co-creation is, hey, you've got some work to do, because you could jettison this guy and you're going to create the same one next time. So I'll say this sometimes to people. Again, it sounds a little stark, but there's truth to this. I'll say, look, do whatever you can think of. Ask everything of you that you can, because it's going to do one of two things. It's going to create a relationship you're going to want to keep, or it's going to give you peace to leave. And make sure that you don't carry regret, make sure that you don't recreate the same thing next time. So again, I'm going to be talking sometimes in that blunt, stark way, but it calms people down because there's just truth in that.
Certainly food for thought.
Sure.
So you, a few minutes ago, you were talking about what is it that can happen in a person's life that can create difficulties in their forming good, healthy relationships with others, especially romantic relationships. And one of the things that you mentioned was trauma.
Absolutely, yeah.
Could you expand on that a little bit, Maggie?
Sure,
Tell us how that can fit in.
Well, first, I always want to say this about trauma. So many people think trauma has to make the news, has to have a handprint bruise, has to be egregious and catastrophic. And sure, those things are traumatic, but sometimes relatively subtle and long-lasting events can also be trauma. So we might be talking about one blazing event. We might be talking about things that certainly have an effect, but they're a little bit more subtle. But generally speaking, the things that are required for intimate connection, and I would list those briefly as honesty, self-confrontation, self-disclosure, vulnerability. That's pretty much the opposite skill set that you're going to learn in a traumatic setting. Because in trauma, you're going to learn how to navigate and survive it, right? How to figure out what's going on, how to keep your armor up, how to know, how to try to get through it unscathed if you can. Think about that, though. Those are antithetical. They're really different skill sets. So
I'm sorry, go ahead.
So I don't mean to say that people with a trauma history are the ones with difficulty with intimacy. Everybody has difficulty with intimacy. It's just a stout developmental skill, an adult developmental task, and everybody finds this difficult. Couples counselors find this difficult, like no one's immune. But when you start to break that down and you say, oh, you learned exactly the opposite things to feel deeply, closely, warmly connected to somebody. Oh. We just start there. It's not like, oh, you learned the wrong thing. I'm certain it was the right thing then, but now. It's what's standing in your way, and a lot of folks really get it. I've got to go back and get the skills that weren't on the menu for me because of trauma.
So could you talk about what are the elements of an emotional trauma? Whether it's a chronic situation or something that happens in a tenth of a second.
Sure.
What will we find there?
I had a guy once say, you mean getting yelled at by my mom every day for 54 years was trauma? Because it changes his view of himself, and it changes his view of the world, and it was out of his control, especially as a child.
Right.
What would it do to you if you got yelled at or criticized or picked on by a parent every day of your young life, if you never could do anything right? Now, that they might not necessarily say that's trauma, oh, put that in a movie of the week, but for that guy, oh yeah, it had a huge impact on how he met the world. So we might be talking about overtly abusive events. We might be talking about parents who aren't solid in themselves, so they rip down a kid. You know, they rip down their confidence.
So it's something that is deeply personal.
Yeah.
It threatens the person's self.
Yes.
And it's something that is beyond their control. They can't run,
Yes.
they can't hide.
Yes.
Okay.
And you know, this is kind of a grim way to talk about this, but years ago I volunteered with a group that's now called Homicide Survivors, but at the time it was called Parents of Murdered Children. And I usually worked with the kids, but I sat in with the parents once, and I remember hearing a person say this, and it just made such an impression. She said, I knew the world. I thought I knew the world. I knew where to go and how to navigate. I thought I knew what was in the world, and then one day, kabam, an event happens that takes the life of my child, and I don't know the world anymore. I don't know who to turn to. I don't know what's safe. I don't know what the limits are.
Right.
It changed the whole world kind of retroactively.
Yeah.
And I thought that was such a great description of that shift in someone's experience of the world when they've been through traumatic events. When you yourself have been harmed, you can no longer walk through the world and say, gosh, isn't the world a safe place? Now you have to say, sometimes the world is safe, sometimes it's not.
Yeah.
What do you do with that risk?
Yeah.
So think of that person learning to navigate or guard in the world. Now they're in intimate connection.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So that which they valued most highly
Yeah.
is the piece that is now blocking them.
That's it, exactly,
Yeah.
right. And so you can't say you learned the wrong thing. They didn't.
Right. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
what about today?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I love my job.
How about trauma outside of the context of relationships?
Sure.
Do you ever do any work with?
I've worked out at Cottonwood to Tucson for, I think, 17 years. I'd have to look. Just doing trauma work and trauma groups and individual work. And so that might be, you know, folks are there, it's a dual diagnosis rehab. Folks are there to deal with a number of things.
Right.
My own bias is that looking through that lens of what are the events that have turned corners for you, whether or not you called it trauma before. What are the events that changed things for you to say, that changed the way I felt about me, that changed the way I saw the world? Those things are so often seeds in addictive and compulsive behaviors. So
Yeah.
obviously it's my bias, but I think anybody out there could do a trauma group.
But you know, if that traumatic event or traumatic process
Sure.
happened or started before the person was verbal,
Oh yeah.
what if they don't have a hook to hang it on?
Well, yeah, sometimes you're not going to be able to go back and say, here
or
was
to
the smoking
describe
gun.
it.
Right, absolutely. Sometimes, in fact, with trauma in all kinds, sometimes you can talk to an adult who was harmed last week and they still can't describe it because the memories are being processed by a different part of your
Okay,
brain,
that's
so it's
right,
not a
yeah,
cerebral
a
thing.
nonverbal, yeah.
But if you have somebody who was harmed as a very young child, generally speaking, we don't have reliable memory until 4-ish and up. So they might not have clear memory, they might not have any way to talk about it, but they're gonna have the scar.
The implicit memory, the
Yeah.
feeling-based memory.
Sometimes a body
Yeah,
memory,
yeah.
sometimes a sense of fear or dread in certain
Yeah.
circumstances that will certainly start to guide them, right? Start
Right.
to shape things. I don't think you always need to go back and have a crystal clear memory of every event that's been painful for you.
But on the other hand, if somebody says, and this is a person who's generally well-adjusted in the world, and somewhere along the line in you're interviewing them, they say, you know, I have a very expensive car, but I keep it on the driveway. Why do you do that? Well, I don't know. I don't like to go in the garage, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
And then, oh, that's interesting. So that's that feeling of dread that has no explanation
Sure.
other than, let's talk about this.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's just such a lovely little platform, right? They've opened this little door. And
Exactly.
I don't have an answer. I'm not going to go and saying, oh, I know what happened there.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
don't. But man, we can sit down and go, huh, let's check that out.
And then for years later, I'm going to be wondering, we weren't talking about cars.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And that came up. It was about a car. It
Sure.
started about a car.
Yeah.
So
Didn't
you
end up
never
about
know.
a car. Yeah. Right. I mean, the fascinating complexity of this stuff, it's just enervating. I mean, I come out of sessions just, sometimes just pooped, but so excited too, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I bet. So now you've got me wondering, and this question is not on the list of questions. When did you decide that this was the career for you?
Counseling in general or couple stuff?
Well, I'd say, let's say counseling in general.
I had gotten a radio of TV undergrad degree, very useful. And I was working in a
I
hotel.
noticed you do have an air of professionalism about you, and I was wondering about that.
It was
That's
way
good.
behind the scenes, though. So I was just kind of floundering along, didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up. I was working as a concierge, and I started to volunteer in Tucson with, it was called Las Familias then. I don't know if it's still here, but it was a program that worked with children who had been sexually abused. And I did the volunteer training, and they would have these rec programs where you'd be able to do recreation programs for kids who had been through abuse. So I was there for a long time. I volunteered for a while, and then I started to sit in on groups, and I got real interested in thinking, gosh, maybe this is what I want to do. Made the decision to go to grad school. I actually started leading some aftercare groups even in school. And it was just that, something just clicked into place. This is the work that I want to do. And it's fascinating. And I worked with kids when I was just out of school, but the longer I've gone, I think the couples work fits me so well because I have a really low boredom tolerance. And I really love that Rubik's Cube work. I love work that makes me feel a little, I get stuck in every single session. 27 years later, I get stuck. I'm thinking, how am I going to work this? How do I keep in line all of the moving parts of the system? And I love that. I love being a little afraid.
And I bet that you still wake up in the middle of the night and you're thinking, okay, so.
I'm a terrible sleeper.
Yeah.
So I do wake up in the middle of the night, but generally I don't dream about clients. I've worked really hard to try to find a really clean way to say work life and my life.
Yeah.
Because if trauma bleeds through all the time, it'd eat you alive.
I hear
so
you.
I weld
Yeah.
and I teach boot camp
that's
and
true.
I ski and I do the things that make my life feel rich, yeah.
Well, Maggie, I am so grateful that you
Sure.
made time to come on the show.
Yeah, this is lovely.
And so can you take just a minute and let the viewers know how they can get in touch with you?
Sure. I have a private practice, so I think the website is going to be up. I have a website
Good.
where you can email me straight from the website.
Okay.
I can put the phone number in there as well.
Okay.
Lots of different ways to contact me. So even if you have questions and you wanna just reach out and ask, do I think I could be a good fit for them? Absolutely. They can always send me a message from my site.
Great. So it's Maggie Morton, no, I'm sorry, I got this wrong. MortonCounseling.com.
Right. Morton like the salt, so MORTON counseling.com.
MORTON counseling.com. And also, if people are trying to get in touch with Maggie and you're running into, or you got the website transcribed the way I transcribe them, which is wrong, please call us here at Creative Tucson. We will make the connection for you.
Sure.
And once again, thanks for being here.
You're welcome. Thanks, Jeff.